Few things illustrate the dire state of the housing market as effectively as this chart. Crafted by Nick Gorelli, it compares American incomes with American home prices. The stark reality is undeniable. In many cities across the country, home prices have skyrocketed far beyond what workers earn. This imbalance between prices and incomes has reached alarming levels, rendering the long-term ratio between these two variables irreparably broken. Charts like this fuel fears of an impending crash. While the exact how, when, and why remain uncertain, the underlying theory is simple. This unsustainable ratio must revert to its long-term average. After all, when people can no longer afford their homes, something has to give. This scenario mirrors what occurred during the last crash. Take a look at this chart depicting Miami's housing market. In 2007, the ratio between incomes and prices soared to 7.6 before plummeting to 3.5. Signaling that as the market inflated beyond normal income levels, pressure mounted from the top. Once the breaking point was reached, a significant reversion ensued. Presently, we observe that this ratio far surpasses the pre-2007 crash peaks, reinforcing the earlier point and prompting many to wonder if another crash is imminent. But maybe this time is different. Now, before you click off the video, please consider this. There are now many countries in the Western world where incomes have failed to couple with home prices, and the differences are far beyond what we have here in the United States. The biggest example of this is Canada, our neighbor to the north. Now, I understand that Canada is a different nation, but respectfully, out of all the countries on this planet, it's probably the one that is most similar in culture, economy, and geography. Now, I know people will easily point out some of the big differences, but overall, it serves as a good comparison when looking at what is possible in real estate. If you're feeling the pinch in the United States, a glance at the Canadian market might make you reconsider. Take Toronto, for instance. A typical home here commands over 1 million Canadian dollars, and the upward trajectory seems unstoppable. In multiple years since the 2008 downturn, home prices in this city have surged by double digits. In 2009, prices shot up by 10%, in 2016 by 20%, in 2020 by 12%, and in 2021 by a staggering 27%. With sustained growth like this, the compounding effect kicks in, resulting in high prices that defy rationality. According to this report by measureofaplan.com, a typical household, not a person but a household in the Toronto metro area would have to spend over 73% of their income in order to afford the payment for a typical Toronto home. In other words, the typical Toronto household cannot afford to buy any resemblance of a home. The people who are buying are usually couples with high-paying jobs, successful business owners, or people who have received an inheritance of some sort. When we examine the real estate market by comparing, say, the Toronto metro area to another US city like Miami, the scale of escalation becomes quite stark. It's important to note that Miami is not considered an affordable market by any means. It's among the fastest growing in the US. According to listing.ca, a typical detached home in Toronto cost about $250,000 in the year 2000. Fast forward nearly 24 years and that price has skyrocketed to approximately $1.3 million. This represents an increase of 420% in home prices, that is without inflation. Meanwhile, if we turn our attention to the US, specifically the Miami Case-Shiller Index, we find that since the year 2000, home prices have risen by about 329%. This comparison highlights that even though Miami is considered a booming market, Toronto outpaces it dramatically with a near-perfect 24-year streak of significant price growth. This scenario underlines just how intense the real estate market dynamics can be, demonstrating Toronto's exceptional rise in the face of global urban housing trends. And it's not just Toronto experiencing skyrocketing real estate prices. This trend is evident in many countries globally, and Amsterdam provides a striking example. Thanks to the Dutch tradition of meticulous record keeping, we have access to real estate transaction data going back to the 17th century. This historical depth offers a unique perspective on the current market conditions. A graph created by Matthias Kovar illustrates this extraordinary surge in prices recently. While Amsterdam has seen several real estate bubbles over the centuries, the current escalation is unprecedented. None of the previous bubbles since as far back as 1620 compares to what we're witnessing today. This most recent run-up in prices highlights the extreme nature of current markets around the world. Everywhere from New Zealand to Australia, England, Germany, and Canada, there are clear indications that the prices we see here in the United States are nowhere near what is possible. When you compare our price-to-income ratios to some of these other countries, there is potential that our situation isn't even close to topping out. In Canada, there have been people calling for a crash long before 2020, and every year they were met with more and more price gains. Now, in 2024, it's no different. Take a listen to this recent news report that breaks down the dire situation.
Canada could be sitting on the biggest housing bubble of all time. That's according to one strategist who's warning that once it bursts, Canada could be thrown into a deeper recession than any have forecasted. Let's bring in Philip Colmar. He's a managing partner and global strategist at MRB Partners. He's coming to us today from Belleville, Ontario. Phil, good to see you. Walk us through the big takeaway here of what you're saying.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for having me. The key here is we've been monitoring it for some time, but the Canadian housing market it does have excessive house prices relative to income. So when you're looking at that big headline about a housing bubble, what you really want to do is compare house prices to incomes. And Canada for some time has been escalating on that front, particularly even before the pandemic. It was last decade. It had a cheap interest rate environment or a low interest rate environment owing to really problems south of the border. After their housing bust, they went through deleveraging, which meant they dampened down consumption and inflation, allowed interest rates to be very low. Bank of Canada followed suit, even though the crisis wasn't here. And that seduced a lot of home buyers into buying homes at using those interest rates to effectively buy homes, and house prices to incomes surged. And through the pandemic, we got it again and kicked it further up. So we do have pretty excessive house prices to incomes, and I'll turn it back. But certainly underneath the surface, when you're looking at a housing bubble, the things you really do worry about is when you not only have excessive home prices, but excessive leverage backing the whole system. And Canada kind of is really off the charts on that front, and that's really where the concern comes in.
Despite repeated warnings of a market crash and rising interest rates, the real estate market continues to thrive. Indeed, there was a slight dip in late 2022 when interest rates first began to climb, similar to what was observed in the US. However, as we have seen, prices have stabilized and even started to climb modestly in recent months. It's important to note that this is occurring in a country without 30-year fixed-rate mortgages. In Canada, typical mortgages range from 6 months to 10 years, with 10 years being the most common. This means that buyers who purchase at these high rates are not only dealing with the current high costs, but they're also vulnerable to future rate increases. At the end of their mortgage term, Canadians usually renegotiate their terms, taking on interest rates available at that time. Moreover, Canadian mortgages often come with a hefty prepayment penalty, which discourages paying off the loan early. Despite these less than ideal conditions for buyers, housing prices continue to rise relentlessly. In summary, the argument that high prices relative to incomes must inevitably lead to a market crash is not particularly compelling. It's evident that in various countries around the world, high price-to-income ratios have persisted for decades without leading to anticipated crashes. Critics who have predicted collapses based solely on these ratios have been consistently proven wrong. Notably, in the US, these ratios are actually much lower compared to countries like Canada, suggesting that the situation could potentially worsen before it improves. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below, and as always, please make sure you hit that like and subscribe button if you enjoyed the video.